Hi, today I wanted to talk to you about air pollution. Now, I know this is not the world's sexiest topic, and I will also admit that as a lung physician, I have probably spent the majority of my career not thinking about air pollution. As a lung doctor, I've been trained very much to think about what goes on inside the office, how to diagnose and treat lung disease, but we don't spend enough time thinking about prevention and how do we preserve lung health. But since the pandemic started, I've been thinking about this a heck of a lot more, and I think it's really important for all of us. To be honest, some of the most interesting research for me that's come out of the pandemic is some research that came out of Oregon that suggests that individuals who were exposed to pollution from wildfires actually had increased risk of developing COVID-19. And so, to me, what this means is that inflammation related to things like air pollution, uh, first of all, it may be subtle, you may not even know it, but B, actually can be hazardous to your health. They're actually also now finding that patients, for instance, that have long haul COVID had evidence of lung inflammation even prior to developing COVID 19. So, because lung disease in this country is so under diagnosed, there could be a lot of us walking around that have subtle, undiagnosed, undetected levels of lung inflammation that actually are going to put you at increased risk for bad things to happen if you, for instance, get exposed to viruses such as COVID-19. So what is air pollution exactly, and how do you protect yourself? Well, air pollution really consists of two things. One, it's the larger particles. It's dust. It's particles from, for instance, wildfire combustion that get up into the air and that we breathe. It's also noxious gases that are created from burning things like fossil fuels or modern production plants. And unfortunately, as we move forward, pollution is only increasing. So, what does this mean for us? I know we can't live in a bubble, but there are some things you can do to try to make smarter choices for you and your family. So, one thing you can do is there is an airnow.gov website that actually gives you the air quality index. There's also apps that can tell you about air quality on a given day. If it's a bad air quality day, that may not be the day you want to go outside and do your test run for a marathon, or do some huge outdoor activity that you had planned, if to the extent that you can control those things, which I know sometimes we can't. If you're driving in the car on a bad air quality day, it might be a day to put the recirculate on as opposed to leaving the vents open. Where you live actually matters. Now, I know we cannot all control where we live, but urban environments, for instance, where there's a lot more exposure to traffic, will cause pollution. Thinking about where we put schools, for instance, there's evidence to show that just having elementary schools near a freeway or a highway is associated with lower levels of lung function in children, increased risks of flare-ups of asthma, for instance, and that actually can improve when, for instance, children are moved away from that environment. Again, I know we can't completely control that, but to the extent that you can, it's just something I think to be mindful of. Regardless of where your school is, they can adopt anti-idling policies, for instance. I know the lines have gotten really long for pickup at school since the pandemic. But for instance, recommending to your school that they go on to the American Lung Association website, and there are resources there that schools can adopt, for instance, to have an anti-idling policy to at least try to keep the amount of pollution from cars at a minimum for children that are playing. I know, again, for me, for years, I just sort of didn't think about it because you don't always see air pollution, you don't always smell it, you don't always think about it. But I do think that COVID-19 is teaching us that we can't really continue to ignore lung health, and that we need to start thinking about lung health. We have to start thinking about how to proactively protect ourselves. So just like, for instance, if you were going to go and garden and you would wear gloves, I always wear gloves when I garden. You have to think about how to protect your lungs. And so, for instance, in some cases, like last summer, I cleaned out my I will admit, pretty disgusting garage, and I knew I'd be kicking up dust. There were probably mice in there, who knows? And so I actually have more masks around than I used to. I wore a mask to protect my lungs. Unfortunately, just, we can wash our hands. It's very difficult to wash our lungs. Now, the lungs do have a self-cleaning mechanism. We actually have these small little hair cells that line the passageways inside our lungs that help to sweep larger things up to the surface, but it's not perfect, and we can't get rid of everything. And some of those really small particles, not only do they cause inflammation in the lungs, believe it or not, there's actually some evidence to show that it causes inflammation within the blood vessels. And so, we're just beginning to understand the amount of damage that exposure to air pollution can cause. So I think, my advice is just be mindful. Just be mindful. Think about what you're breathing, and do your best to protect yourself.